In 1978, China was one of the poorest large countries in the world. Its economy was small, its people were poor, and its future uncertain. At the time, China's gross domestic product stood at roughly 150 billion US dollars, smaller than Italy's and only slightly above India's. More than 80% of the population, over 750 million people, lived in extreme poverty, largely dependent on subsistence agriculture and state rations. China's population then was about 960 million people, nearly a quarter of humanity. Yet this enormous population generated less economic output than countries with far fewer people. South Korea, which had been poorer than China in the 1950s, already had a much higher income per person and a rapidly growing industrial base. Brazil and Mexico were firmly middle-income economies, while the United States, with a GDP above $2.3 trillion, existed in a completely different economic universe. China was not simply underdeveloped, it was economically locked. After 1949, the Chinese Communist Party established a centrally planned system. The state controlled land, factories, labor allocation, and prices. Private businesses were banned, and profit was viewed as ideologically dangerous. While the system aimed to ensure equality, it destroyed incentives. Farmers produced only what was required. Factories met quotas but ignored efficiency. Innovation was slow, and technological progress lagged far behind the rest of the world. By the mid-1970s, China's GDP per capita remained below $200 per year, lower than many countries in Africa and Southeast Asia. The model had reached its limit. The turning point came after Mao Zedong's death. In 1978, Deng Xiaoping emerged as China's most influential leader and introduced a new way of thinking. Economic success, he argued, mattered more than ideological purity. His famous phrase, "It doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice," signaled a fundamental shift. China would judge policies by results, not doctrine. Rather than embracing full capitalism overnight, China chose a gradual, experimental path. Economic freedom would be introduced carefully, tested in specific locations, and expanded only when proven successful. The first reforms began in agriculture, where most Chinese people lived. Through the household responsibility system, farmland remained collectively owned, but individual families were allowed to manage their own plots and keep surplus production after meeting state quotas. Between 1978 and 1984, agricultural output grew at more than 7% annually, and rural incomes nearly doubled. Food shortages declined sharply, and millions were lifted above subsistence levels. These reforms freed surplus labor from the countryside and created the conditions for industrial growth. For the first time, China had room to experiment beyond agriculture. That experiment took shape in the early 1980s with the creation of special economic zones. These zones were deliberately placed along China's southeastern coast, close to global shipping routes and overseas Chinese business networks. The first four were Shenzhen, Zhuhai, and Shantou in Guangdong Province, and Xiamen in Fujian Province. Inside these zones, the rules were different. Foreign companies were allowed to invest. Private businesses were legal. Prices were determined by the market, not the state. Taxes were lower, regulations were lighter, and local governments were given greater autonomy. Among them, Shenzhen became the most dramatic example. In 1980, it was a small fishing settlement with a population of roughly 30,000 people. Within decades, it transformed into a megacity of over 17 million residents, becoming a global center for manufacturing, electronics, and technology. Today, Shenzhen alone produces more economic output than many entire countries. As these zones succeeded, China expanded the model. Entire coastal cities, including Guangdong, Shanghai, Tianjin, Dalian, and Qingdao, were opened to foreign trade and investment. Later, regions such as Hainan province were granted special economic status, further deepening market reforms. Foreign capital flowed in. Chinese exports, which totaled less than $10 billion in 1978, began to grow rapidly. Factories multiplied across the Pearl River Delta and Yangtze River Delta, linking cities like Dongguan, Suzhou, and Ningbo into global supply chains. During the 1990s, China extended reforms to its industrial sector. State-owned enterprises were restructured, merged, or closed if they could not compete. While this led to short-term unemployment, it also created space for private enterprise. Cities like Wenzhou became known for private entrepreneurship, while Shanghai re-emerged as China's financial and commercial center. By the end of the decade, China's GDP had surpassed $1 trillion, a seven-fold increase from 1978. Few countries at similar starting points had achieved anything comparable. India, despite liberalizing in the 1990s, grew more slowly. Russia, transitioning abruptly after the Soviet collapse, experienced severe economic contraction instead of growth. China's full integration into the global economy came in 2001 with its entry into the World Trade Organization. This step bound China to international trade rules and accelerated export growth. Manufacturing hubs in cities like Shenzhen, Suzhou, Shanghai, and Guangdong became essential nodes in global production networks. Between 1980 and 2010, China sustained average growth rates close to 10% per year, something no other large country had managed over such a long period. More than 700 million people were lifted out of poverty, accounting for the majority of global poverty reduction during that era. By the early 2010s, China had become the world's second largest economy, with a GDP exceeding $14 trillion and a population of over 1.4 billion people. Cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hangzhou were no longer just manufacturing centers, but hubs of finance, innovation, and technology. Yet China's economic freedom remains distinctive. The state continues to control land ownership, major banks, and strategic industries. Political power remains centralized, and economic freedom operates within clearly defined limits. This hybrid system, state-led but market-driven, has no direct equivalent elsewhere. China's rise shows that economic freedom can be introduced gradually, geographically, and experimentally. From fishing villages like Shenzhen to global cities like Shanghai, China transformed itself not through sudden liberalization, but through deliberate, location-based reform. From a $150 billion economy struggling to feed its people, China became a global powerhouse that reshaped trade, production, and development itself. Few transformations in human history have been as vast, as fast, and as consequential.